Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Walker with the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us Friday morning, bright and early. Hope you have your cup of coffee ready. We are going to wait maybe a minute or two to let people get through the joining process so that we don't miss anyone. But thank you for being here, and we'll be getting started in just a moment. Okay, I think we will get started. Again, my name is Steve Walker, and I am the Executive Director here at the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, and we are excited that you could all join us today. We have three really amazing housing leaders, Maureen Howard, Nancy Nash Mendez, and Representative Frank Chop. We are here today to listen to these housing leaders, recognize the three of them. We gave housing awards to Friend of Housing Awards at our conference earlier in the month. Hard to believe it was still this month, but just weeks ago. And in Spokane, this session is something new for us. We had our Friend of Housing event, which was fabulous. But what we wanted to do is to create a little time and space to talk with and learn from in a much more casual way our Friend of Housing Award winners. This is the first of two. We're doing 3 award winners today, and we're going to do the same thing this time next Friday. So please join us next Friday as well, as we'll have 3 more folks to learn and listen from. So I'm going to introduce each of our speakers one by one and ask them to spend maybe about 10 minutes. I have some prompting questions, and then we'll get back to engaging you all as participants today to ask questions of our 3 Friend of Housing Award winners and get a little dialogue going. So as we go, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and be sure to indicate for whom your question is directed to. So kicking it off, in my upper left-hand box, there's Maureen Howard. Great to see you, Maureen. We were sorry you couldn't be with us in Spokane, but super glad you're here today. I wanted to acknowledge Maureen was our 2022 Lifetime Achievement Award winner, our Margaret Seavey Award. So congratulations, Maureen. And for the last 40 years, she has worked as a highly effective advocate, leader of a shelter and service organizations, a teacher and a mentor for others, myself included. She has contributed immensely to the fight to end homelessness statewide, and especially in Tacoma and Pierce County. And Maureen, I thought I would just kick it off by asking us if you would start by telling us how you got into this work in the first place.
I got in, well, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me to be here. Thanks for the award. And I got in by accident. I was a teacher, an administrator, and I had done a project for the state of Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and got caught in a hiring freeze. So I needed a job, and a job was available in a tiny little community organization started by people from 3 different churches, Black and white and Catholic and Episcopal and Methodist Episcopal. And I actually went in thinking I was going to close it down as a friend. And a man came the beginning, first day I went to work in January 1982, and he had his pack and he didn't ask for shelter. He asked for a job. And that's when I started. And every time somebody said they needed something, or the community needed something, I tried to figure out how to respond. And it turned out that I was quotable, and I took advantage of every single opportunity to speak. And I kept meeting people. And I'd like to tell you I had a great plan, but I didn't. I was determined people were going to have employment, because there was no state assistance for single people at that time. It had been stopped, and people were going to have a decent place to live. And I just kept on going.
Thank you for that. I have been in many rooms with you and have seen you operating, but I thought it would be interesting to hear you speak a little bit about how did you position yourself to be heard in these various spaces, especially in the earlier days?
Well, in the earlier days, we couldn't have done this, all right?
Correct.
You had to show up in person. And so that was the first thing, was showing up. And that usually meant driving to Seattle, because that's where most of the people were showing up. But I showed up in Chicago for one of the first national homelessness conferences. I got noticed by some national people, got invited to be on to attend national meetings, be on national boards, that sort of thing. And so that was part of it, was simply being able to show up. Then I was closest to Olympia when we started actually doing any kind of legislative work of the group of us who were working. And so it was easiest for me to go to Olympia, just time and travel wise. But I didn't just show up. I showed up with something to say. I was always trying to break the Seattle King County cadre of people who were already working together, already had funding, already had relationships, and how to take that statewide. From the beginning, my commitment was statewide, and I didn't care how big or how small the shelter was or the town or anything else, but how could we get resources statewide, and how could we make things work? And I always went prepared. Whatever was available about the coming meeting, I prepared for the meeting, and I always tried to tell the truth. And I never had all the truth, but I had the truth that I knew from the people who were on the ground around me and what I was learning from others. And then I'm pretty good with hunches, and I'm pretty good with trying to find the right question. And I had a lot of freedom. So I could say what I thought was important to be said. And sometimes that didn't please people. And sometimes people nodded in assent. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe thinking about all of the coalition building and partnerships, how did you find and how did you go about starting those kinds of partnerships and coalitions? Because I know there's been a lot, and that has been a key and a core value I know that you have for advancing the work. So could you talk a little bit about starting and creating or finding the right partners to advocate with?
So we had a statewide conference on homelessness, must have been about 1984, I think. And I almost tripped to Seattle to be part of the working group to make sure that this was not a Seattle, conference, but this was open. And it was my honor at the end of that conference to do what we had decided would probably happen, which was to call for the group to indicate if they would like to have a statewide coalition on homelessness, and to actually bring that into being. And then I was the president of that coalition for about 8 or 9 years until I left the area. And so when we put that coalition together, our intent was a coalition of local coalitions. So grow the folks locally so that they can participate fully. And we met regularly. People wanted a conference. So we had a conference. We focused it on line staff. And that was very different from what normally happened, where the executive directors got to go when we focused on the line staff. So that was one coalition, eventually morphed into what's now the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. And things change. I mean, times change, opportunities change. So that's not, a bad thing. Things just change. The other one was the Housing Trust Fund Coalition. I think Representative Chop was probably part of that as well, and many others that we know. And again, this was focused on, could we get a state housing trust fund going? And I was sitting in my office in the Hilltop in Tacoma, and the phone rang. It was a woman named Sharon Lee, who was working for a council member in the city of Seattle. And she said, "I'm Sharon Lee. What would you think about a state housing trust fund?" And I said, "Well, sounds pretty good to me." And so we were off, and we built a coalition around that state housing trust fund, around that issue. And then ultimately that became I forget what we called it or how many different things, but now that's the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. And the other one that really isn't around anymore, but was really key, and it's probably people, they don't realize that they're probably still using commitments from Bank America and Key Bank and other banks, the Washington Reinvestment Alliance that we put together, again, statewide, always statewide. And we put that together when it was at the time the largest bank merger in the country, and that was Bank America. And we negotiated, again, we didn't have computers, we didn't have any kind of social media, we didn't have any of that. We're on the phone, on landlines, all right, and in person, showing up. And we negotiated, and what I brought, the housing people who were already working, and this is where the Seattle people were really key, because they had housers who were already doing development. But what I had is that I knew homelessness really well, and I knew what homeless people needed, and I knew what the organizations trying to help them needed. So we ended up with 57 points on our negotiating list of everything from lending to grants to banking, products and services. And when we finished, we had all 57. And the bank president said he'd never negotiate with me again. So, and then I headed a coalition, the Idaho Coalition, Housing Coalition. And that was really interesting because there the focus, we did a bank merger in Idaho too, and I did the Community Reinvestment Act, led that negotiation. But it was focused on people with disabilities. There were so many people in Idaho who had farm-related disabilities. So it was a whole new world for me. Yeah.
That's a lot of hats that you just described. And I know it's only a handful of the different hats that are on your hat rack. But maybe you could talk a little bit about, if you think about all those various roles and hats that you've worn, what in your opinion has provided the greatest impact or the greatest sense of accomplishment for you?
Yeah, I really thought about that question, which thankfully we got ahead of time. And it's not just one. If I had to pick one, I'd pick the coalition work and the partnerships and bringing people together and making that table as big as we could make it, and trying to find the places where we can agree, and understanding that as professionals, we will sometimes disagree, but that will not stop us from the overall work. In pure fun, it's creating money. I mean, this is like billions of dollars, folks. I mean, this is great. And it goes statewide. I think the other thing is being able to, I had the freedom to design programs that were responsive to the needs that we saw. Now those are considered standard homelessness response programs. But at the time, they were groundbreaking. Nobody was doing the kinds of things that we were able to do. And then, yeah, I think, you know, people being able to work with people, all kinds of people. And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
that's great. I appreciate you sharing a lot of that history, especially the Housing Trust Fund. I feel like that is the DNA of the Northwest and Washington in particular. And certainly as I talk with colleagues around the country, Washington is known for how the heck did you get all this done? Like, and it's a community, and it's advocates, and it's just so impressive. And I've been operating in that community for so long now, and it is probably at the center of what I appreciate most about the work, is that we can agree to disagree on some things, but we're all driving towards an ultimate outcome of housing for everyone, safe housing,
Permanent housing.
permanence, all of the service needs, just taking care of the whole person. So thank you for that. I'm going to transition, but we're going to come back to you, Maureen, in a few minutes. And I am going to shift gears to Nancy. So I'd like to turn to Nancy, who's a winner of our Community Crisis Response Award. And Nancy is the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Okanagan County, where she has led community through the crisis of multiple natural disasters, the closure of a large lumber mill, causing the loss of just many jobs. Nancy secured financing to preserve affordable apartments, and in working in partnership to successfully build more rental housing and affordable single-family homes in her beautiful Okanagan Valley, a remote rural part of the state. And so, Nancy, I'd like to ask you to start by telling us how you first got into this work. I think you're on mute, Nancy. It's all right. It happened to me too, so you're good.
Thank you. I also, like Maureen, got into this work by accident. I was happily being a community entrepreneur, which I consider myself. I always have been a community entrepreneur, always trying to find a way to make one person's life better today. I was happily employed with Employment Security Department and the Conservation District as a grant writer. And I was in the middle of writing a FEMA fire recovery grant when a board member, I was at Safeway, and a board member of the Housing Authority said, Nancy, we're looking for an executive director. Could you please apply? At that point I said, Ivan, what is the Housing Authority and what do you guys do? That was how little the agency was known then. So then I went to my husband and said, shall I apply? And I did. Before my my interview, I did a search on their financials, and I found out that the agency was in the red and just barely surviving. So during my interview, I asked one of the questions that is probably what got me into trouble and led me into housing. I said, what will happen if I don't take the position, or you don't find somebody in Okanagan County who knows about housing or who knows how to lead an agency? And they said, we are already in conversation. We are going to seek merging the Housing Authority with the Wenatchee Housing Authority. So I went home and I told my husband, over my dead body, will a housing authority be merged? These Okanagan counties be merged with Wenatchee. So that is how all this started. 2015, Okanagan County just experienced the devastating 2014 fires, the 2015 fires, where we lost over 400 homes. Coupled to the fact that our largest mill just closed, we live in a very, very rural and very impoverished county. These were devastating moments or years that is still now impacting our county. I never really, as executive director, not only were we in the red, but also we had only 53 units and very small amount of vouchers, and the need of housing people grew overnight. It wasn't the homeless, it was the people who lost their jobs, the people who lost their homes because of the fires. I never really, because of that, I never really had the chance to stay in the neonatal care of housing and housing development. I have to get in, put my running shoes on, and baby, this is a sprint. I am a marathon runner. I know how to run long distance, but this was a sprint. How fast can we grow? How fast can we develop? How fast can we acquire affordable housing? Because of all this, we had a lot of rural development units that was coming to the end of their mortgage, and we were going to lose this rental assistance throughout the county. So that is how I came into housing, and it's my passion, it's my love. I am so honored to work with a team and a community that sees the need of housing, that comes and meets me where I am weak and fills the gap where I don't have the skills, so we can make housing opportunities for all a possibility in Okanagan County.
Well, you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit, and I will say that I'm sure glad that you did step into that leadership role, because we need you at the helm there in Okanagan. And as you think about the natural disasters that you mentioned and have experienced, the mill closure, could you talk a little bit more about the pressures that put on the housing authority and some of the things that you did to address those issues, some of the actions that you took, you and your team?
Absolutely. I think the biggest pressure for us the first year was the fact that we saw the need. We did not have the capability or the funding necessary to provide for that need. As I stated, we at that point administered only 165 vouchers for Section 8, which is, they were fully used. So we really didn't have any vouchers even to say, here you can go and find a place to rent. The pressure of having a limited amount of staff to provide for that need, and the need of always one of us being in the community, which ended up being me. Our county is very large. We are one of the largest counties the size of Rhode Island. Therefore, in order for the housing authority to be present in a community meeting, say in Winthrop, that is over an hour and 1 mountain pass over. I wish now that we had the Zoom capabilities then, because that would have allowed us to be more present on the ground with the community. I would say another pressure that that was big for us was the fact that the agency had no experience in development, but that was also a blessing in disguise. Once we identified that we needed to, in order for us to fulfill our mission of expanding housing opportunities for low-income families, we were able to connect and join partnership with the Office of Rural and Farm Worker Housing. Marty Miller and his team just came to us as a blessing, as angels, because we would not be able to do what we have done in the last 7 years, which is we have expanded or added 171 new units of affordable housing throughout Okanagan County in 7 years. As you well know, just to develop one project, it takes 5 to 7 years. But in order for us to be able to develop 2 projects, brand new projects, and acquire 4 or 5 affordable housing units, and 2 of them being rural development, it's thanks to the ORF team who showed up for us and who basically is the developed extending arms of our agency. Without them, we could not be doing what we're doing for our community.
I'm glad you mentioned Marty and Orf. Marty's one of my favorite people in this community, and he is really adept at getting things done and really embracing the partnership opportunities that you just described. Maybe to ask if there's anything else you'd like to add, but just as you think about working in remote or working in rural Washington, and especially in the area of housing, what other unique issues have you come upon just in your time now with the Housing Authority? Anything else that comes to mind?
This may not be an issue, but it is something that we as a housing authority have to be practicing on a daily basis. I even have a note underneath my computer. When people see that you are the housing authority, everybody comes to you and they want you to build housing. The school districts, the hospitals, the PUD company, I mean, everybody come in and say, you are the housing authority. What are you doing to not be developing housing for my workers? I cannot hire an engineer, or I cannot bring in a new doctor because there is no rental units available in Okanagan County, regardless if you have money or not. A true story is that the executive director of the behavioral health clinic here found a place to live temporarily in an Airbnb. And the only reason why he found that place was because it was COVID and there were no activities going on for rentals. There is just absolutely no place to rent. So we have to have a tunnel vision. And this is the reason why we are on our mission almost on a daily basis. We are here to provide, to develop, acquire, and expand housing opportunities for low-income families. If we don't do that, we are diverting our attention to somewhere else, while our most vulnerable population still suffers. And I would say that is one of the struggles that we have. And also because we live in rural area, it's hard to go to the grocery store, to Save or anywhere, or the farmer's market, without forever being pounded with this. What are you doing? You're not fulfilling your mission. You are not developing housing for the teachers. So I would say having a tunnel vision is very, very important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a really key insight right there. It occurs to me that at our board meeting yesterday, we did pass a resolution that will help finance roughly 50 new units up in Colville. And so it's nice to know that bit by bit, we're a part of that community, helping to build the much needed affordable housing. So thank you. We will come back to you as well, but we are going to transition here and invite Representative Frank Chop into the mix here. Frank, Representative Chop is the winner of our Housing Intersection Award. And among many things that you get involved with, Representative, there is this health and housing hot conversation, important intersection. And you know, you've been at this a long time, as I believe the longest sitting speaker in our state's history. Is that fair to say? Thought that's true. Yes. But now you've shifted hats and are still looked to help move big puzzle pieces. And some of those puzzle pieces have been around securing the support of legislators and over 80 organizations across the state to pass the bipartisan Apple Health and Homes Act. And I think, you know, as I said, this program is at the intersection of housing and healthcare. is an investment in permanent housing plus supportive services for our most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness. Representative Chop, welcome. Thank you for making time and being here. Could you tell us how you came to focus on health and housing together?
Well, thanks, Steve. By the way, it's quite an honor to be here with you, along with Maureen and Nancy. I tell you, it really is quite an honor. So I appreciate all their great work over the years. And so I've luckily been in the fields as well to try to help out as best I could. For many years, obviously, people have heard the phrase, housing is a fundamental human right. In fact, when Maureen talks about Sharon Lee, she and I started the Long Term Housing Institute, and that was our theme. Housing is a human right. Well, it's also a fundamental human need. And so when you look at how you address the tragedy, the scandal that's happening on our streets all across the state, people are suffering and dying on the streets. One comes to the quick conclusion that why are people homeless? Well, I guess 70%, according to the studies, of the chronically homeless are there because of their medical condition. And so we said, if you're homeless because of your medical condition, then you ought to have a home as part of your medical treatment. By medical condition, I basically referred to mental illness, substance use disorder, and significant physical disability. And through the Apple Health program that we started many years ago, very successful, covers a whole, I think it's up to 1.8 million people in the state of Washington. We said, we cover all these other things, prescription drugs, for example, and that gets to be very expensive, but very necessary, and nobody questions it. If you have a physical ailment, like a stroke, for example, and you're on Medicaid and you go in the hospital, they immediately roll you into an MRI machine. Nobody sits around trying to figure out how to raise funds to buy the MRI machine. It just said, well, of course we're going to have to do it. We have to look at housing as a human need and as a medical condition to get folks off the streets and into a safe, decent place to live, which not only takes care of their health care concerns, but saves a ton of money. So that was part of the strategy, is to say, look, hospitals, Harborview and others, you're spending enormous amounts of resources on these individuals. It's cheaper actually to provide the home and then follow-up services as well. So I could keep going on, but I think that's enough for now.
Yes, thank you for just that introduction to, again, moving big pieces here. I think it'd be great for you to share with us how did you create sort of the synergy between housing and healthcare stakeholders, talking about, you know, as much as we wish it wasn't the case, we do tend to operate in silos. And how did you break that down, and how did you bring energy around this conversation?
Well, I thought we had to have a unifying theme. And so I just started using the terms prescription for a home, so that a doctor or a nurse practitioner could literally write a prescription for a home, because they have to care for the person's health. And then I basically told a bunch of people, guess what, we're going to push forward on that. This is what we're going to do. And so that turned out pretty good, because then we ended up consulting over 220 stakeholders. And so when you lay out the basic theme and say, we're going to do this, and then you say, hey, tell us what you know so we can learn from it. One of the things we learned was the state had already, through the healthcare authority, done a federal Medicaid waiver and created a program called Foundational Community Supports, which provides a lot of support services for folks who are homeless, except the home. And so we're just putting in the last piece, which is the biggest piece, of having a home there as part of the healthcare system, just like any other ailment that people have. And when you do that, people then identify with people who have mental illness, because there's much greater acceptance among the public to help people with mental illness. And also, it makes sense for businesses. It's much better to have them in a decent home, but instead of in the doorway on the street right in front of their business. So it makes sense all across the board. But sometimes to do the obvious, you have to just organize people and push them to get it done. And so we passed Apple Health at Home, House Bill 1866, and very proud about that. Now we're implementing it.
Indeed. So that's the setup. Well, let me just remind people to use the Q&A button to register questions that you'd like to ask our award winner guests today. But Frank, as you, so we're off the ground. Thank you for leading that effort. Could you tell us where things stand today, what progress has been made thus far, and what some of the next big steps look like?
Well, luckily, we were able to put quite a bit of new money into the state capital budget, including for Apple Health and Homes, but also for rapid acquisition of existing buildings and other capital investments. So those have been going forward this summer, and literally we're buying up apartment buildings, many of which will house folks who are eligible for Apple Health and Homes. In addition, in a few weeks, there will be a request for proposal out there put forward by the Department of Commerce for nonprofit nonprofit agencies across the state to apply for it. In fact, I'm glad Nancy brought up Marty Miller, because I met with him and other folks, Rhonda Hoff from the clinic over there, to submit an application. Luckily, they have two applications, one to buy a hotel in Yakima, and the other one is to build a cottage village in Yakima for the homeless. And so that's two examples of two different models, but all to the good. And so we're also fortunate that the Department of Commerce has fully embraced this effort. They created an Office of Apple Health and Homes and did some reorganization to make it efficient, and hired the director there, and Melody Payzalt, and who used to run the Foundation Community Support Program, by the way. That was her. And so we're out there actively encouraging local nonprofits to submit bids. Plus, we have organizational capacity technical assistance through Enterprise Community Partners through our Home and Hope program to help local nonprofits to help identify sites, put together proposals, and submit applications for the funding. And the last part is, which is very important, is that we always have to look ahead. So luckily, the Department of Commerce has recommended to the governor of adding another $100 million just for Apple Health and Homes in the next capital budget. So we're just going full bore, not only in Yakima, but Spokane, Tacoma, Vancouver, etc.
And catching a lot of attention from our colleagues around the country too. So want to just appreciate the leadership in this really important space of understanding the clear intersectionality of housing and health, and that we need to really be taking care of the whole person if we intend to really stabilize people.
Well, Steve, part of this is turning rhetoric into reality. We have a lot of people, talking about social determinants of health, and I say, what are you doing about it? So I get my impatient side come out, and which is sometimes good, other times a little obnoxious, but and so that's why we are trying to focus people's energy to do the obvious, and that's sometimes the most powerful.
Yeah, thank you. That's a profound statement in and of itself right there. We are going to thank you, Representative Chop. We're going to circle back now, Maureen and Nancy and Frank. We're going to popcorn a little bit here. We've been taking in questions, and I'm going to try to work some technology here as well, try to feed you each a question or two. Coming back to you, Maureen, if you would. In your acceptance speech, you called on advocates to do more. This is obviously a way of life for Maureen Howard, the question is really how do you do more without getting burned out, without how do you what comes to mind with that question?
When I started, we didn't know that this was going to be a long haul. When Ken Cole, who ran the Downtown Emergency Service Center at the time, said in the 80s, we're in this for the next generation, just cold shivers went up my back, because I thought this was an emergency. Official unemployment was 10%. When jobs came back, people would have housing, things that get back to normal. That's not what happened. And so the first thing is you got to make a decision to be in for the long haul. And if you're going to be in for the long haul, you've got to be able to regenerate yourself. And there's a lot of talk about self-care now and things like that, and access to even virtual. But I think that people really need to figure out what gives you energy, what keeps you going, what is it that allows you to get up in the morning, and also to know it's okay to step back and let somebody else step forward. And maybe you come back and maybe you don't. I mean, I stepped into the diplomatic corps, and when I came back, fortunately, colleagues welcomed me back. But you need to be able to do things like that, so that, I mean, what makes us good as advocates is that we can hone in on the problem, on solutions, on what we need in terms of organizing, all that sort of thing. It all takes tremendous energy. And so we got to be able to restore that every day, every year. I mean, we ought to have sabbaticals, folks, ought to be built in to our contracts with our nonprofit employers. You ought to get a sabbatical after so much time, and it, 7 years, like an academic used to be. I don't know what it is now, but that's a long time. But so I think that, and we ought not to have to worry about paying our own housing costs. If you're going to work in this field, then we've got a right to a fair wage that allows us to remain stably housed. Find some friends, find people who share your values. I just think that's critical. And when it seems, celebrate the wins, curse the losses, and, pick up for the next day. I mean, I've had some incredible losses, but I've had some really good wins too. And so, tell people you're doing a good job. We don't do that very often to each other.
Yeah.
And do that deliberately. The awards are incredible. I mean, that's a recognition and I just think it's really important that we do that and figure out how to find your place. And maybe it's a different place than it was before. I mean, when I came back after being a diplomat, all my housing buddies were in all these important positions, like Representative Chop. I mean, people had moved into power. It was great. So those are some of the things I think about. What feeds your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be afraid to be bold. I'm serious. It's our moment.
A lot of wisdom in there. I think one of the things that tracks closely with my experiences is we have to pause and celebrate those successes. Otherwise, it just feels like going around and around fighting battles. And there are a lot of great successes. So appreciate that very much. Nancy, let's bring you back in. Have a question here. How did you build support within the community, including community engagement and coalition building? So you're newly stepping into the Housing Authority role, and you're out talking about acquiring buildings, preserving buildings, or building new units. How'd the community respond, and how'd you go about building those relationships and coalitions for supporting your work?
Showing up and always having an elevator speech, regardless who you are talking with in your community. Just showing the need, because the human heart wants to help. The housing crisis that we have now and we had then is worse post-COVID. Back then in 2015 and even now, I go to the Rotary meetings, to city council meetings, to go Chamber of Commerce meetings, to the farmer's market. Anywhere community will be, I am there as an ambassador. Gently reminding people that there is a need for housing, that only we the people can help solve this crisis. And once again, always with a smile, with gratitude, thank community members who have helped you to get where you're at. And always find an opportunity to partner with other community members, other organizations. So when someone is talking to Representative Chop, is talking, oh, we're doing this and this and this. This is our ask. But remember, the Housing Authority of Okanagan County also needs this. That partnership is very important.
Thank you for that. Yeah, there's clearly a lot of themes here, and just in the experience of the three of you, probably not a surprise. Speaker Chop, can we come back to you? There's a couple of questions, but I'm going to start with how have you gone about getting other legislators? Legislators, as you well know, a lot of things are coming at you, a lot of different areas to focus on, a lot of constituent suggestions of what you should be focused on. How did you get legislators to focus on something that is hard to really it doesn't feel really tangible, because it really is moving mountains to bring the housing and the health together? How did you go about, how are you successful in bringing legislators along, I think is the essence of the question.
Well, basically, it's a very simple proposition. Everybody needs a home, particularly those that are suffering and dying on the street. But more importantly, in terms of reaching to other legislators, I tell you, after we passed House Bill 1866 on the House floor, we passed it out of the House of Representatives 96-2. I mean, I was floored. And I didn't actually talk to that many legislators on the other side of the aisle, but they embraced the idea in large part because they had family members, as we all do. I mean, most people in their families or friends or whatever have folks who have mental illness or even substance use disorders. And they said, Frank, thanks for doing this. My son has, drug addiction. Thank you for doing this. This makes all the logical sense. And so when we passed it, it was quite emotional because, I passed it overwhelmingly, but people then came up to me and told me what their personal stories were. And some of those legislators actually been on TV talking about their own family situations on both the Republican and Democratic side. It's something that people can identify with. And so we hope also to follow up on that in various parts of the state, whether they're represented by a Democrat or Republican, to really appeal to people's better nature and actually a sense of solving part of the problem. So another area that we hope to have potentially a cottage village is actually out in Grace Harbor County, where the drug problem there is significant. Of course, it's significant pretty much everywhere, but in that area, we hope to help them in the local community, the local organizations, to put together projects that actually meet this need. So I was very pleased by that, and it was driven by people's personal and family experiences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Technology is overwhelming me a little bit here, but we're going to go back to Maureen. Maureen, if the question is, what challenges did you face when forming coalitions and engaging community members, and how did you overcome them? So if you think back to many days in the trenches, how did you, what was the strategy there, and how did you, what are some of the challenges you remember? And it could be a particular one, or it could be a theme. And how did you go about overcoming those challenges?
You think we had a strategy?
And I'm glad it brings humor.
Excuse me. Chemo has done weird things to my voice.
You're doing great.
But yeah, so I'm totally unschooled. I understand in coalition building. I've got community organizing training out of actually graduate school in the University of Notre Dame when I was working on a theology PhD, and learned from organizers. So this is the mid-70s. Learned from organizers who were working in San Francisco and Chicago and the South textile mills, and then the East Coast, Boston, things like that. But the things that I think are really important and that were challenges, one, I think you've got to have a real purpose for this coalition. And there are some structural things about a coalition that I think are important, and we don't think about them. And I didn't think about them until I was staffing coalitions. And I thought, I got this group of smart people who know everything in this room. Why are they having the same conversation they had last month, and they're making the same decision they made last month? And then it dawned on me, I got it for 2 hours, and they've got other work the rest of the time. And so what I realized is that somebody needs to staff a coalition. I don't care what you call the person, but somebody needs to make sure there's an agenda. Somebody needs to make sure that notes are taken. Somebody needs to remind people that they already made that decision 3 months ago, and this is what it is. And if they want to revisit it, that's fine. And so I started using agendas like working documents and really writing in what, if it was something that the group had already discussed and made a decision on, I'd write that decision in so everybody could remember, that sort of thing. So tools, using tools. And then somebody's got to lead. One person, 2 people, 6, I don't care how many, how they figure it out, but somebody's got to lead. Somebody's responsible. And they've got to figure out how they're going to make decisions. That trips up a number of coalitions. They're confronted by a request, and they don't have a process for making a decision on behalf of the coalition. And that's an agonizing process to go through. But I just think that's something you have to do. And I was just really lucky that I had people like Martha Diltz. There was a woman working for the city of Seattle, Karen, I think her name was, in homelessness, and people who had a real vision for what we could have with this state coalition for the homeless. And with the Housing Trust Fund, it was pretty easy because we didn't have a Housing Trust Fund. So how were we going to get it? There was the focus. And same with the WRA, the Reinvestment Alliances. These were bank mergers that were going to happen right now. They were going to take away the only lender who would lend for affordable housing. How were we going to capitalize on this right now? And so and I think coalitions probably have a life.
Mhm.
And I think part of what we're not very good at is saying the times have changed, the issues have changed, the players have changed. It's time to change the coalition, and that's all right.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. Thank you, Maureen. So Nancy, let's pop back to you for a second. The question is about, could you talk a little bit about the Methow Housing Trust and your collaboration with the Housing Trust and how that's improved housing options in the area so far?
Yes. The Methow Housing Trust is a nonprofit organization that started out of the need of developing not low-income housing, affordable housing for those people who are in the 60 to 150% AMI of Okanagan County. And predominantly, they serve the Methow Valley area, where a regular home now is being sold like for $750,000 over $1 million. So your average person just cannot afford buying homes or owning a home there. We started developing a relationship, the Housing Authority developing a relationship with this newly formed then 5 years ago, Methow Housing Trust. And the 2 executive directors had walking a dog, literally taking a break from the meeting. We had this vision of what a beautiful community would be if the Housing Authority could develop affordable housing for low-income families in a same lot per se, of homes owned by the Metro Housing Trust. That would be an example and inspiration to who those are in the lower area, low income, to see someday maybe they can own a home, that American dream, owning a home. Through conversations, we have developed this memorandum of understanding now, to our amazement, and we are so forever grateful to the Metro Housing Trust Board. They own a lot, 8-acre parcel in Winthrop, and they have donated the land to the Housing Authority in order for us to be able to develop 22 affordable housing units there. We are in this path together. The sticker shock of what it costs now to develop has been quite a challenge for us to overcome. Both agencies have tremendous millions of dollars gap in our funding potentials just because of, like I said, the remoteness of the area and the high construction costs. But both agencies are very committed in making sure that we can have those homes built and those apartments built, because Winthrop has no base. They have one rural development. I believe it's like 24 units of low-income housing, and that is it. So the path is just unfolding. We are a trailblazer in this. I think both agencies have our machetes in hand and just trying to move away the obstacles and the barriers.
Right.
We are afraid. Yes, we are afraid, but we are so eager to see how this is going to come to fruition. The numbers of development, we need millions of dollars, a lot of zeros after the 9, but money's out there. We know it's going to come. What we do know is we have our elevator speech. We have an amazing opportunity to expand and bring people into housing in Winthrop, and we are ready to go and knock on people's doors to let them know about this need.
Great. Well, it's gotten off the ground in a powerful way, and we will all be watching and finding ways to be supportive of that important partnership. So thank you. Representative Chop, can we come back to you for I know you have this probably in your shirt pocket. Could you highlight for folks on the call what we can expect in this legislative session, what we should be keeping an eye out for advocacy opportunities to support housing and housing affordability and the support services that we've talked about? Can you give us a preview?
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. I mentioned already the first one. I'll give you 4 examples. First one is that we need to dedicate some money in the Housing Trust Fund for Apple Health and Homes, the capital side of things, so we can build more things like what Nancy's working on across the state. Second, we need to have an ongoing funding source for the Housing Trust Fund, because it's, instead of just sort of one-time money in consecutive years, we need an ongoing funding source for that, and we have a specific idea for that and proposed legislation. Also, there's all this talk about this incredible wealth inequality, particularly generational wealth inequality. And most of people's wealth for a family is their home, if they can own it. And so we have a very specific proposal. We call it the Covenant Reinvestment Account, to invest heavily in BIPOC home ownership. And we have a specific idea, lots of excitement about it, because it's something that a lot of people are talking about. And I said, well, what are you doing about it? Well, I don't know, Frank. Well, how about this idea? So we're going for it. We got a coalition going forward, involving some state agencies, but a lot of advocates and nonprofits across the state. The last one is that we're working in partnership in coalition with a variety of folks among the advocates for people with disabilities. So we have a specific proposal about funding more homes for people with developmental disabilities and other disabilities. I mean, part of this thing with Apple Health and Home, we're trying to help somebody who's got a disability. It happens to be a medical disability, but we also have folks who are developmentally disabled that need more homes. So we have a specific proposal we're developing for that. I could go on, Steve, but I think 4's enough for now.
That's great. That's a good teaser for us all. And you definitely have your finger on the pulse. So thanks for sharing that. So we are right about at time, but I wanted to just do a quick sort of rapid fire round, starting with you, Maureen. If you could take 15 seconds, 30 seconds to just share what you would like people to walk away with today, given your work in affordable housing. So I'll focus us on affordable housing and housing affordability and stability. If you could share some wisdom, just like what would you like people to walk away with, given your experience?
I think listen, learn, tell the truth, be bold, be kind, and find the right questions and offer the solutions.
Thank you. Fantastic. Nancy, anything you want to add to that?
Know your population. Be there with the population you're serving. Pause to celebrate your victories. Take time to recharge and be bold.
Beautiful. I'm picking up on a theme here. Representative Chop.
Well, as a community organizer, I just say organize, organize, organize.
There we go. It's that
Vote.
simple.
Vote.
Thank you. Vote, be bold, organize, be good to each other. Right. Well, we are at time. I want to thank you guys. This, I'm sure we could have gone on for hours. This is our maiden voyage here. I think it was a great success. I really do appreciate each of you for your great work. It was an honor to be able to honor you at the Friend of Housing Award. It was a wonderful conversation today. And I just, again, thank you for your time. The audience, thank you all for showing up. Hopefully you're taking away some of the wisdom and the inspiration to bring to your own work. And then a plug for next week. We're going to do this again next Friday. 3 more really wonderful, committed, passionate people. So check us out next Friday for part 2 of the Friend of Housing Coffee Talk. It will be with Terry Britt, Antonia Medrano, and the Bremerton Housing Authority. So a really diverse slate of awardees. And just sign up at housingwa.org. So again, thank you, Maureen, Nancy, Frank, really appreciate you. And everyone stay well. Bye-bye.